We start with the biggest threat to humanity, not those melons, but this monstrosity making minced meat out of the poor goblins. A few days ago, this monster emerged from an abandoned lab's cryocapsules. It had thick arms, strong legs, and a muscular body. The monster understood what it was but didn't have a name. It used to be a human named Yunos. Now Yunos had become something entirely different, unable to even speak human language. Yunos only remembered joining a gene-enhancing program run by the military. Back then, he was just a new recruit. He had been hesitant at first, but the world was at war, with countries fighting all across the continent. What shocked him now was the current date displayed on a nearby machine, 1872 in the Northern Empire. He had signed up for the experiment when he was 18 back in 1648. That meant he had been asleep in the capsule for 224 years. Looking around, Yunos saw a corpse inside a nearby capsule. He stood in silence, trying to process everything. Questions filled his mind. Why had he been left untouched for so long? What had happened to the Floretic Empire? He also thought about his family, the ones he had left behind. Though his heart grew heavy, he pushed those thoughts aside. Without proof, he couldn't be sure of anything. For now, Yunos decided to leave the facility and see what was outside. He wandered through the dark hallways, noticing more corpses scattered around. Along the way, he found a matchstick. As he moved further, he came across a problem. The gate wouldn't open. It seemed the place had no power. Still, he figured there had to be some kind of backup supply since the capsule had kept him alive for so long. Yunos stood before the thick gate, worried. He knew it was impossible for someone, even like him, to force it open. However, he realized he had turned into a macho monster. Curious about his new strength, he punched the gate. A loud bang echoed through the area, but pain shot through his right arm. He dropped to the floor, clutching it in agony, and let out a painful screech. When he looked at the gate again, he gave it a thumbs up for staying intact. It was better for their homeland that way. Yunos had no choice but to find another way out through the underground facility. The thought of being trapped and dying there terrified him. He didn't want to remain a monster or meet his end in such a place. Frustrated, he lashed out at the thick gate with punches and kicks, but after a while, he stopped. A strange calm washed over him and his mind became clearer. He realized the facility was built to hold creatures like him and withstand their destructive power. If he kept going, he knew his arms and legs would give out before the gate did. He started thinking harder about how to escape. As he clenched his fists, he remembered something important. He had been part of a gene-enhancing experiment. That gave him an idea. He forced his sharp claws into a gap in the gate and pried it open. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. Yunos concluded that the scientists' experiments had worked. With his new strength, Yunos broke through a wall with a single punch. He kept smashing through walls until he found a chute. Using his claws and strength, he climbed up the wall, determined to get out. When Yunos stepped outside, he felt confused about where he was. He decided to find a high spot to get a better view of the area. While exploring, he realized that not only was his strength enhanced, but his vision was also much sharper. His eyes worked like they had a zoom function, letting him see far away with incredible clarity. But even with his enhanced eyesight, all he could see from the top of a cliff was a vast forest stretching endlessly. He didn't remember any forest like this in the Empire. The thought of what might have happened made him feel sad, but he quickly calmed down, as if nothing had happened. That's when Yunos noticed another strange change in himself. His emotions were being suppressed. This ability kept him from feeling anything that might interfere with combat. At the moment, he found it useful, but he couldn't ignore the horror of what it meant. The scientists had succeeded in turning humans into weapons. Despite this, Yunos made a decision. He jumped off the cliff, landing with a powerful slam, and swore to himself that he wouldn't become a weapon. As he wandered through the area, he came across an airship that looked like it had crash-landed long ago. Inside, everything was destroyed. While searching, he found a flight log and some letters from the northern kingdom of Canaan. The letters confirmed the airship was from Canaan. According to the logs, the airship had been attacked by a monster, which caused it to crash. But the most shocking part, the logs were written 200 years ago. Yunos let out a sigh. This confirmed what he had already suspected. Thankfully, he had mentally prepared himself for such discoveries. Based on the logs, the airship crashed 3 days after leaving Canaan. Judging by the airship's speed and travel distance, Yunos had a rough idea of where he was. Yunos no longer felt hunger, but he still ate some old biscuits he had found. He was worried about not feeling hungry anymore, but decided to keep eating regularly to stay safe. He stepped outside and started walking east. He remembered there was a village nearby and hoped to find people there. Even if it had been destroyed, he thought he might at least discover some useful information. However, if the village was still intact, he knew his monstrous appearance would make things difficult. As he walked, he suddenly stopped. A bad sour smell filled the air and his body reacted without him thinking. He crept through the bushes to find the source. In a clearing, he spotted goblins celebrating with their spoils. He realized they were the same goblins who violate female elves in hentai manga and anime. Yunos was a man of culture just like you, our dear viewer. The strong smell made him feel sick, and he felt sorry for the imaginary elves being used by the goblins. Yunos clenched his fist and stepped out of the bushes. He knew his body was strong, almost superhuman, but he wasn't sure how it would hold up against monsters. The goblins noticed him as he walked toward them with a menacing air. Without hesitation, he threw a single punch so powerful that it created a shockwave, wiping out most of the goblins in one blow. As he continued fighting, Yunos realized something. This wasn't just a fight or a simple battle, it felt like he was creating a nightmare for these goblins. When the fight ended, Yunos had a moment of clarity. He understood that goblins weren't powerful creatures and the fight had turned into a one-sided massacre. Still, he found himself oddly hooked, like he was playing a video game. But when he looked at the blood on his claws, he felt it was all too much to handle. Meanwhile, in a nearby village, a woman named Diera sighed as she asked a man named Lizelle if he had the money. Lizelle replied that completing the task would improve her rating, even if there wasn't any real reward. Diera complained that there was nothing worthwhile left to explore in the area. Lizelle apologized, but it was clear he was distracted, unable to stop staring at Diera's chest. Diera noticed and sighed in frustration. She thought to herself that she might have let him hug her if he were a better man. Just then, Lizelle's sister Lena and another man named Gista joined them. Lena asked Lizelle if he had taken care of exploring the nearby forest. Diera answered for him, saying she didn't even want to hear Lizelle's reasons for going into the great forest of Floratus. Soon after, we see Diera and Lena getting attacked by goblins. Lizelle and Gista were also taken down by the goblins. Diera thought about how everything had gone wrong and blamed her bad luck. The day before, Yunos fought a monster bigger than him. With just one punch, he easily defeated it. He wasn't just testing his strength, he needed food. He cooked the monster's meat over a fire. But when he tried to eat it, it tasted so bad that he threw it all up. He felt sorry for the monster and buried it. He realized he still needed to drain the blood just like humans would do. He wondered if he still had human taste buds. Yunos remembered the day he turned into a monster and lost the ability to speak the human language. Despite this, he decided to keep living. He thought he could still find a way to become human again and meet his sisters or their descendants. His family's bloodline was strong, and even if the empire fell, his sisters must have survived. Yunos had accepted his new monster form, as it wasn't as bad as he thought. He was confident in his skills, but he felt disappointed that he couldn't speak the human language. He really wanted to talk to people. Yunos had to think carefully about which country to move to if the empire really fell. His homeland, the Floretic Empire, was the largest country in the world and had the most advanced technology. It was thanks to their scientific progress that the empire had managed to survive against the 4 other countries. A place with a similar environment was the northern country of Canaan. The Einhell Republic was also a good option, as it was home to elves who worshipped nature. Since monsters were a part of nature, Yunos thought he might be accepted there, but he still had some worries. He had heard that elves knew magic, and Yunos wasn't sure if his body was resistant to it. He also wondered if elves had males, as he could only imagine them as females. The southern country wasn't even an option for Yunos for several reasons. The kingdom of Caesarea in the east was known for its monster hunters called exterminators. In his current body, Yunos would be an easy target for them. For now, Yunos decided to head north toward Canaan to find a town and figure out where he was. He hoped he wouldn't run into any Caesarians, though he quickly realized his words might be a death flag. While Diera and her group were camping, she reminded everyone that they were exterminators. She asked why they were exploiting things instead of hunting. Lizelle told her to relax. Lena remembered that their task was to find something and bring it back, but she wasn't sure what it was. Meanwhile, Gista expressed frustration over the elves taking over the former empire 5 years ago without permission. The group started to wonder if the elves were there to search for something, like a hidden treasure. Diera reminded them that the former empire only had things related to science, and the other countries didn't like science. Seeing everyone so serious, Lena pointed out that they looked like they were having a picnic. Lizelle reminded her how dangerous their job was. Diera then agreed with Lena, calling her brother cold-hearted. She knew Lena was just trying to make things lighter and apologized for being too harsh. Lena said it was fine. Diera called her cute and said she wished Lena were her little sister. Gista then told Lizelle to say something, but Lizelle just stayed quiet. Diera didn't know this would be the last time the 4 of them would have fun together. She didn't realize they had been living so close to danger all along. The next day, Lizelle was hit by a fireball and everyone froze in shock. Lizelle was sent flying into a boulder and crushed. Gister, distracted by what happened to Lizelle, got easily surrounded by goblins and was held down. He tried to escape, but a menacing ogre appeared and crushed him. Lena couldn't do anything as she watched her brother and Gister get obliterated. Diera tried to stay strong, but she couldn't help shaking in front of the goblin army led by the ogre. She had dealt with ogres and goblins before, but the ruined area from the Empire made things harder. Diarra tried to protect Lena and attacked with a fire spell, but a goblin easily blocked her magic with an anti-magic shield. The shield had belonged to Lizelle, and the goblin took it away. Knowing that her magic wouldn't work, Diarra realized they were doomed. Suddenly, goblins attacked Lena. Diarra became distracted, and the rest of the goblins used the chance to attack her too. The goblins started to strip the girl's clothes. Seeing Lena cry out for help made Diarra feel guilty for not being able to protect her. Scared, the two girls looked at each other. Instead of letting the goblins control them, Diarra decided she would end her own life by biting her tongue. Something suddenly appeared with a loud noise. Diarra and the other goblins stopped and stared at the monster that had just shown up. Yunos stood confidently in the middle of the battlefield, and Diarra wondered what kind of monster he was. Yunos looked around and saw the goblins causing trouble for Diarra. The goblins complained about Yunos' trespassing, but Yunos didn't pay attention to them. He was more interested in the melons in front of him. He had come because he smelled goblins but didn't expect to find humans. Among the two men, he noticed one was somehow still alive. He also saw another woman in the group. He grumbled about not being able to see the second woman's melons and pushed away the goblins who were bothering Lena. Confused, Diarra couldn't believe a monster was helping them. She wondered if he was hostile against the goblins. Just then, she saw the goblin shaman from earlier casting a spell. The shaman shot a fireball at Yunos, but it didn't affect him at all. To Yunos, it felt like a tickle. He looked around, found the goblin shaman, and ran over. He grabbed the shaman's head and crushed it like an apple. Diarra, holding Lena, couldn't believe that the same fireball that had killed Lizelle had no effect on this strange monster. Yunos then focused on the ogre, which was leading the goblins. He hadn't noticed it before because he was distracted by the melons in the area, but now he saw the ogre could be a good sparring partner. Up until then, Yunos had only fought lower-level monsters. It felt like the perfect chance to test himself. The ogre suddenly charged at Yunos, swinging its huge wooden club at his head, but the blow didn't even leave a scratch on him. Diarra was shocked because it was a similar attack to the one that had sent Gista flying. She realized they were in an even worse situation now. Meanwhile, Yunos was disappointed. He punched the ogre and sent it flying toward the base of a cliff. Diarra and the goblins watched in shock as blood sprayed from the ogre like a fountain. Yunos followed up by leaping onto the ogre and stepping on its face. The ogre's head crushed easily under his foot. After that, Yunos took care of the remaining goblins. The battle turned into a chaotic mess. He even let out a cute tee-hee as he finished. Then he looked toward the naked women, hoping they wouldn't be scared of him now that they were safe. He couldn't help but cry because he struggled to communicate. As a way to thank them for saving him, Yunos decided to look for something that might help him survive in the future. He searched through Lizelle's body and found a potion and a sword. Diarra was shocked and begged Yunos not to take the sword. She told him to take anything else, but not the sword. However, Yunos couldn't understand her due to language barriers. Realizing that the humans were Caesarians, he remembered the flag he had raised earlier and knew it would be bad to stay any longer. Diarra tried to stop him because the sword was the proof of their team's existence, but Yunos simply walked away with it. Diarra then understood that monsters would always act like monsters. She vowed to keep chasing Yunos as long as he had the sword. Yunos still didn't understand her and thought she was just being loud and annoying. Since she seemed angry, he quickly left the area. Even so, he couldn't help but notice how beautiful Diarra's melons were. It was too bad they would never meet again. Once again, this clueless protagonist raised another flag. Later that night, Yunos felt regret about his actions. The sword he had taken turned out to be a rare magic sword. It needed magic power to use its special abilities and was very expensive. The sword could even hurt him, but his strong healing ability quickly fixed the damage. Yunos realized the sword must have cost a lot, and he knew he had made a big mistake. He had only wanted to build a friendly relationship with Diarra, but now things had gone terribly wrong. To him, the situation felt hopeless. At the same time, Lena asked Diarra if she was really sure about leaving on her own. Diarra promised to get their sword back and told Lena to wait for her. Crying, Lena hugged her tightly. She was afraid Diarra might end up dying like her brother and Gista had. Diarra couldn't ask Lena to come with her because she didn't want Lena to get hurt or die. Instead, she promised Lena that she wouldn't meet the same fate as the others. Diarra couldn't find the right words to apologize, but she made a decision in her heart. If Lena gave up because of fear of death, Diarra would be different. She swore she would catch Yunos. Yunos was testing how far he could push himself with hunger and sleepiness. He figured he probably couldn't feel either, but he kept trying to force it anyway. To make things worse, the backpack he had grabbed from Diarra's team, filled with potions, was about to fall apart. He realized he needed a bigger backpack, and some salt to make his meals better. As he thought about it, he realized there were lots of things he wanted. He decided to search for them if he found a town. By dawn, he arrived at a town, but it was completely abandoned. While exploring, he noticed some anti-aircraft guns. These weapons were the pride of the Floretic Empire since they could easily take down flying monsters. However, they were also the reason other countries started wars with the Empire, as the monsters would flee into their lands instead. The town didn't have tall walls but had even more anti-aircraft guns, so Yunos figured it must have been an inner town. He checked the faded signs around him and realized he was in the northeastern part of the town called Ilquel. From here, he had two options. Head northwest to Luke Dill, which was near Canaan, or go east to the former military base of Carnash. At least now he knew where he was. Just when Yunos was about to continue exploring, he caught a familiar foul smell from somewhere nearby. He immediately recognized it as the stench of goblins and wished they would just disappear forever. Dropping his backpack, he sprinted toward the source of the smell. The goblins, who were busy playing with a skull like it was a ball, froze in shock when they saw a massive creature charging straight at them. Yunos attacked them fiercely, leaving no chance for them to fight back. As the chaos unfolded, he noticed a few goblins running away together in the same direction. This was unusual since goblins normally scattered when escaping. Yunos realized there was something ahead they were trying to reach. When he moved to strike again, he noticed the goblins acting in a strange, coordinated way. This made him suspect that someone, or something, was giving them orders. It also seemed like they were guarding something. Looking around, Yunos spotted a school campus nearby. He guessed that the gymnasium, being large enough, might have become their hideout. Yunos rushed into the campus, the stench growing stronger with each step. As he entered the gymnasium, he came face to face with a massive, bloated female goblin. It let out a loud shriek, startled by his sudden arrival. Yunos quickly recognized the creature as the Goblin Queen. Goblins sometimes used other races to reproduce, but most of the breeding was done by the queen herself. He noticed that over 20 goblins were born each day, and they only took about 20 days to fully mature. As long as the Goblin Queen lived, the goblin population would keep growing. Realizing this, Yunos decided to destroy everything in sight. The goblins surrounded him, clearly trying to protect their queen. Seeing their desperation, Yunos understood how much they valued her. However, their efforts were pointless against him. He continued his attack, wiping out most of the goblins until only a few and the queen were left. With the Goblin Queen as the final target, Yunos hesitated. He avoided getting too close to them. They smelled absolutely terrible. Yunos decided to defeat the goblins without getting too close. The goblins stood confused as they watched him pick up stones nearby. He could throw them from a distance, but he wasn't confident about his aim. Still, since his target was large, he figured it wouldn't be too hard. He threw the first stone like a skilled pitcher, but it missed and only hit the Goblin Queen's left shoulder. Yunos felt disappointed because he had been aiming for her head. Refusing to give up, he adjusted his aim and threw another stone at her belly. This time it hit perfectly. The stone pierced through the Goblin Queen, leaving the other goblins shocked and unable to help her. In the end, the Goblin Queen fell, defeated. Yunos felt proud of himself for stopping her and saving future victims like the beautiful elves in his imagination. However, he realized he smelled awful from being around so many goblins and wondered if there was a river nearby to wash up. After finding a river and cleaning himself, Yunos felt refreshed, both in body and mind. He decided to explore the area, expecting to find something interesting in a town of this size. While wandering, his face lit up with excitement. He had discovered a shopping mall. He couldn't help but jump with joy. Yunos went straight to the sports section where he found a big backpack. In the kitchen section, he grabbed an iron grill. From the home appliances section, he took a cooler box. Finally, he visited the grocery section and picked up some expired salt, canned food, and drinks. Yunos managed to gather everything he needed to feel like he had stepped back into a functioning world. However, he almost forgot to check on news about the Empire. Just kidding, he didn't forget. Along the way, he picked up some magazines and newspapers. It had been 200 years and he realized that a lot had changed for the worse. First, he discovered that the Empire was in serious trouble. The Western Front had fallen to the elves of Einhell. Even more unsettling, Yunos couldn't find any news after May 25, 1667. The last articles he read talked about the Empire using their ultimate trump card. As a devoted supporter of the Empire, Yunos couldn't shake the bad feeling these articles gave him. Was his homeland really destroyed? The thought scared him, but he knew he had to find out the truth. To do that, he would need to visit the imperial capital. Yunos tried to calm himself as he lay down and thought about his next steps. He decided to first head to Luke Dill, a town near the border of Canaan, to see how the kingdom was holding up. All he needed now was to prepare himself mentally for what might come. A man received a request to check the Goblin's Den in Luke Dill. A noble-looking man confirmed the request and asked the man's team to take care of it. He turned to Orlando and asked if he could handle it. Orlando replied, telling the noble Arngale not to beg like that. He said he couldn't agree to it just because Arngale bowed to him. Orlando mentioned that he had recently added new members to his team, and this task would be good practice for them. However, he asked for a larger reward. Arngale agreed to the request. Orlando then excitedly said that his team, Akatsuki no So, would take care of everything. The next day, some goblins were wandering around the forest. They didn't know that Yunos was nearby, blending in like a tree. He waved at us and explained that he had used his imitation ability. It allowed his big body to blend in with the surroundings so he wouldn't be noticed. But it wasn't the time for jokes, so he slapped the nearest tree. Yunos realized he needed to control his strong body when he was upset. With the few words he knew, he described the Empire's science as scary. However, he needed to be careful. His body didn't need sleep, but the night before he had slept deeply. He didn't even realize it, and it was probably because he was so exhausted. It was like hunger and eating. If he ran out of energy while fighting, he could end up in a dangerous situation. For now, he had to stay cautious. Yunos soon reached Luke Dill, where the tall castle walls proved it was the border town he had been looking for. But he noticed some goblins running out of the gates. He wondered if they were fighting the Canaan people. Since he could use his imitation ability, Yunos decided to see what was going on inside. He walked through the goblins like they were pins in a bowling alley. Yunos quietly blended into the surroundings like a shadow. He soon spotted a group of humans wearing red cloths on their right arms. He realized they were part of a well-known corps from the Canaan army. Yunos counted about 50 of them, fighting off 300 goblins. The humans were surrounded and Yunos thought it might be bad for them. But when he saw Orlando leading the group, he felt confident they could handle it. Even though Yunos didn't understand Orlando's words, he could tell that Orlando was good at giving orders. He was also skilled with a sword. It didn't look fancy to Yunos, but it was enough to fight off goblins. As Yunos expected, the 300 goblins were quickly wiped out. He didn't bother scavenging because he hated the horrible smell of the goblins. He regretted not taking anything with him. Then, the mage from the army used a detection spell to check for any survivors. A burst of magic filled the area and even hit Yunos. He felt an itch and saw the mage point in his direction. Yunos couldn't believe such magic existed and he tried to sneak away. But Orlando ordered his men to chase the monster they had detected. Yunos quickly leaped between buildings, but the army was right behind him. He got too excited about using his imitation magic and didn't notice how close they were. He didn't want to get into trouble with the humans. The mage quickly chanted something and a tall wall of fire appeared in front of Yunos. He stopped running and Orlando called him out. Orlando pointed his sword at Yunos, wearing a smug smile. Yunos got angry almost instantly, thinking Orlando was trying to provoke him. Even though he didn't want to fight, he could feel his blood boiling. There was no guarantee the others could handle him, but it was Orlando who challenged him first. Yunos then took a fighting stance and faced the humans. Orlando was surprised. He had thought Yunos was just another monster, but he had never seen anything like this before. His female companion Annie said the monster in front of them felt dangerous. Orlando agreed. He was starting to feel scared. He remembered that Arngale hadn't paid him enough for this. He quickly ordered the rookies to step back, realizing the monster in front of them was on a completely different level. Seeing the weaker humans step back, Yunos was impressed that Orlando had made the right decision. Because of that, Yunos felt happy that he could do his best against them. Orlando then gave the order to attack. The mage and the archers fired their shots, but Yunos, who was walking toward them, didn't seem affected by the attacks. Orlando was shocked to see the monster in front of them taking no damage at all, stopping their momentum. The vanguards then moved forward and tried to stab Yunos with their swords and spears, but the blades broke into pieces and didn't hurt him. Seeing that the vanguards couldn't do anything against Yunos, Orlando decided to step forward. He saw how the monster looked unstoppable and felt his blood boil with excitement. Yunos was happy to see Orlando step forward since he was the one who started the fight. He was impressed by Orlando's quick slashes even though he was using a heavy weapon. But it wasn't fast enough for Yunos, and he easily deflected Orlando's sword with his bare hands. Orlando and his men were shocked to see the sword stop like that. Orlando could feel his team's morale dropping and realized that the monster in front of them was truly terrifying. When Annie saw her leader in trouble, she rushed to help him without hesitation. Yunos got excited when he saw a blonde beauty running toward him, but he couldn't let her get past him, so he tried to stop her with his fist. Annie quickly dodged his punch and ducked, surprising him. What surprised him even more was the crossbow she pulled out from nowhere. She fired the crossbow and Yunos watched the arrow coming toward him in slow motion. Orlando and the rest of his team were speechless. Annie limped to the ground, calling Yunos a real monster. Yunos stood tall, biting the arrow and glaring at them. Orlando saw that Yunos was about to attack and tried to help Annie, but it was too late. Yunos grabbed Annie like she was a toy. Annie tried to break free, but it was useless. Yunos could feel how toned her body was. Based on how the melons resting on his thumb, he guessed she was size 4. Not wanting to hurt her, Yunos decided to throw her a little farther, but to his surprise, Annie slipped from his grasp, leaving her clothes behind as she used some kind of strange liquid to escape and flashed her melons. As he looked at Annie's bare melons with wide eyes, Yunos realized she was actually size 5. Seeing Yunos suddenly froze, Orlando ordered a counterattack. They couldn't let Annie's risky move go to waste. They quickly surrounded Yunos. Yunos decided to forgive them for the sake of Annie's melons. Everyone attacked, but Yunos easily disarmed or knocked them out. It looked like he was taking things easy now. Orlando joined the fight too, but as expected, Yunos easily blocked Orlando's sword with his bare hands. While Orlando was left confused, Annie also joined the attack. This time she pulled out a magic sword and struck Yunos across the chest. It seemed to hurt him at first, but the wound quickly healed and closed. Annie felt crushed again. Seeing that even the magic sword didn't work, Orlando realized they were doomed. He understood that they couldn't defeat Yunos. Right then, the only thing he could think about was getting as many people to escape as possible. But even though he tried to act as a distraction, he wondered how long he could hold off such powerful monsters. Then, surprisingly, Yunos pointed his finger, like a lawyer in a courtroom. Everyone froze for a moment, but soon they realized Yunos was pointing at Orlando. This made Orlando understand that he could save everyone by sacrificing himself. He hadn't hoped for this chance, but he quickly told everyone to retreat. He told them the monster wanted to fight him alone. A minute ago, Yunos realized he had made a mistake, turning the fight into a one-sided hunt. He had to fix things and had no choice but to challenge Orlando to a one-on-one fight. Annie called Orlando an idiot for thinking he could win alone. Orlando said things would be fine, and when they got home, he promised to treat her to the best drink. He then jokingly told her to hide her melons, or his inner werewolf might attack her. Crying, Annie called him an idiot. Orlando apologized, saying he didn't have a choice. He knew better than anyone that he couldn't beat Yunos. The difference in their abilities was clear, but as long as no one else died, Orlando didn't care. He wasn't sure why Yunos chose to fight him, but he figured he was the only one who fit what Yunos wanted. On top of that, he could see Yunos waiting. Smart monsters used to be a problem, but this time it was helpful. Orlando planned to send back as many of his team alive as possible because that was what a captain should do. He was ready to offer his own life. Orlando apologized to Yunos for making him wait. He then raised his sword, and Yunos took a fighting stance. The tension between them was so thick that everyone around them could feel it. Annie was worried about Orlando. Yunos moved first, and Orlando found the right moment to swing his sword down hard. But Yunos was quicker than before. Orlando couldn't do anything as Yunos grabbed his arms. The others were worried as they saw Orlando lifted up like a helpless child. Refusing to give up, Orlando pulled his right arm free from Yunos' grip and tried to reach for his second sword. But when he looked at his arm, he realized it was too injured to grab the sword anymore. That's when he understood there was nothing more he could do. Annie and the others screamed Orlando's name as Yunos opened his jaws, putting Orlando's head in his mouth, and was about to bite off his head. But suddenly, Yunos spat Orlando out and tossed him to the side. Everyone, including Orlando, was confused. As they watched Yunos run away, Orlando wondered if he had done something to make him leave or if Yunos had poisoned him. While the others stepped back, Annie asked Orlando when he last washed his hair. Orlando thought for a moment and remembered it had been 3 years. Meanwhile, Yunos had spent some time puking in the nearby forest. He couldn't believe how gross Orlando was and wondered when he last washed his hair. He had planned to pretend to be in pain and run away, but he hadn't expected to be tortured by the awful smell. He promised himself he would get back at Orlando next time. Despite that, Yunos was thankful to be alive, and even considered the melons as a nice surprise. He decided to explore further, but then he smelled something strange, the scent of human blood. It was a bit far away, but with his sharp sense of smell, he knew he could find it. He decided to check it out. Yunos discovered the source of the blood smell and offered his respects to the dead. The wounds on the bodies didn't seem to be caused by monsters, and their weapons and belongings were missing. Noticing a trail of carriage tracks leading into the forest, Yunos guessed that bandits were behind the attack. The idea of facing people who had killed and stolen made him oddly pleased, as he felt justified in doing the same to them. Following the tracks, Yunos eventually caught up to the bandits. His excitement was plain on his face, which terrified the group. The bandit leader stepped out of the carriage to see what was going on, but screamed in fear at the sight of Yunos' terrifying appearance. The other bandits panicked and fled, leaving their leader behind, who quickly followed their lead. Yunos felt disappointed when no one dared to fight him, and he realized the carriage likely held nothing valuable. But when he checked inside, he was surprised to find 5 women completely uncovered, and crates filled with supplies. He paused for a moment, taking in what he saw and committing the image to memory. A small smile crossed his face at the unexpected discovery. Yunos guessed that the women were probably being transported to be sold as slaves. Although he was amused by the sight, he recalled he needed essential supplies more than anything else. He decided it would be smarter to go after the bandits who had run away and uncover their hideout. After covering the carriage, he prepared to leave. The eldest of the women, her voice faint, asked if Yunos had saved them. Before leaving, he took another glance at the women, burning properly the memory into his mind. His mischievous smile left the women puzzled, though he had no intention of explaining. Yunos turned toward the road and began sniffing around for the bandits. Thanks to his enhanced sense of smell, he found their trail easily. As he experienced his improved physical abilities and sharper senses, he silently appreciated the Empire's technology. However, he felt disappointed because two important things had been taken from him: his ability to communicate well and his mushroom. On top of that, he didn't even need weapons. Yet he was still carrying Lazelle's magic sword. After hiding his backpack in some nearby bushes, Yunos followed the scent into a cave where the bandits were hiding. He used his imitation ability and stepped inside. The cave looked like a hideout, but Yunos found it strange that there wasn't a guard stationed outside. He wondered if the bandits might be fighting among themselves. The hallways inside were surprisingly clean at first, but then, Yunos came across a prison filled with skeletons and rotting bodies, including what looked like a mother and child. The sight made Yunos feel sick, and he realized these bandits didn't deserve any mercy. Suddenly, Yunos heard screams of pain and death nearby. He could hear the bandits apologizing to their boss, only to be killed moments later. Yunos guessed they were being punished for abandoning the carriage earlier, but he didn't feel sorry for them at all as he listened to their cries. Then, a harsh and unsettling voice echoed through the area. The boss was scolding the bandits loudly. Yunos noticed that the boss was speaking Canaan but wasn't fluent in it, making him wonder if the boss was a foreigner. The boss seemed furious, yelling at his men for running away just because a scary monster had shown up. Yunos figured the bandits might be part of a large criminal group spread across the country. That meant there could be a lot of loot for him to claim later. Eventually, the screaming stopped, and Yunos assumed the boss was done killing his own men. With the bandits' numbers reduced, Yunos decided it was time to step in. However, the doorway was too small for him to enter, and he worried about getting stuck. With no other choice, he charged at the door like a quarterback, smashing through it along with part of the wall. Even so, he still remembered to apologize for the intrusion. But what he saw inside wasn't human. A terrifying monster glared at him. The creature had a humanoid upper body but a spider-like lower body. To Yunos' surprise, the monster could speak Ferletos' language fluently. The spider-like creature demanded to know who Yunos was, accusing him of being the monster that had stolen his women. Yunos stood there, confused and trying to process the situation. Then it hit him. The creature in front of him was just like him. Both of them were experimental soldiers created by the Empire. Meanwhile, Arngale was surprised when he saw Orlando looking clean and tidy for once. Orlando noticed his reaction and asked what was wrong. Instead of answering, Arngale asked when the last time was that Orlando had cleaned himself. Orlando understood why he asked and admitted that a lot had happened recently. He explained that he had no choice but to clean up after Annie and the others insulted him, saying he smelled as bad as a goblin. Orlando then reported that the goblin subjugation was a success, but he had bad news to share. He revealed that they had discovered a new type of monster. Even with everyone working together, they couldn't harm it at all. He added that 7 of their men had been taken down and they were completely defeated. Orlando described the monster as humanoid in shape but as large as an ogre. Its body was entirely gray and it had a tail. Their weapons and magic were useless against it. The creature wasn't just strong and tough but also quick and intelligent. Essentially, the worst kind of monster. Orlando laughed nervously, breaking into a cold sweat as he explained the situation. Arngale asked if Orlando's Titan Slayer weapon had been helpful. Orlando admitted that even he couldn't land a single hit on the monster. Though the story sounded hopeless, he said that was the reality they had to face. Arngale then asked what they should do, but Orlando threw the question back at him. Orlando suggested they would need a high-quality magic sword and a high-ranking wizard to stand a chance. Arngale wondered aloud what would happen if the Night Order came across such a creature. Orlando replied that even they would be defeated. The thought of reporting this made Arngale's head hurt. Orlando reminded him that it was his responsibility to report such things. For now, Arngale asked Orlando to handle the situation with the new monster, but Orlando said it would depend on his abilities. Arngale sighed and commented that this new or mutated monster might not be the only one of its kind. Annoyed, Orlando told him not to jinx it, saying if more of those creatures appeared, they would be in serious trouble. Meanwhile, the spider-like figure kept mocking Yunos, calling him names for silently staring. Yunos was still shocked to hear someone speaking his language. Based on the Spider-Man's appearance, he assumed they might be the same kind of being. Yunos tried to explain that he was a citizen of the same empire, but the Spider-Man only heard growling noises instead of words. Realizing this, Yunos decided to communicate by writing on the ground. However, when he tried to move his hand, he noticed he couldn't. He was completely stuck. Upon closer inspection, he realized he had been trapped in transparent threads. The Spider-Man warned him not to move without permission. Yunos wondered when the threads had been placed around him. The Spider-Man then began ranting angrily about his frustrations. He was upset about the failures of his subordinates and was destroying their lifeless bodies. He also seemed bitter about losing his magnificent mushroom. His words revealed cruelty, as he described mistreating another pair of mother and son for his amusement. Yunos found himself thinking back to the mother and child he had seen among the prisoners, and started to piece together the Spider-Man's horrifying actions. As the spider-like man frantically wondered where to hide the next captured woman, Yunos launched a surprise attack. However, the Spider-Man dodged the powerful punch just in time. Yunos understood why the Spider-Man was angry. He too had lost his mushroom and the people he loved. But the person standing in front of him was far from good. Yunos made up his mind to take him down right then and there. The Spider-Man was shocked when his threads were easily torn apart by a monster. From this, Yunos guessed that the Spider-Man hadn't realized they were both experimental soldiers. Knowing the Spider-Man could prepare for an attack like before, Yunos decided to stay cautious. For now, he kept his distance and worked on removing the threads. He then used one of the fallen bandits to collect them. When he saw how much thread there was, Yunos realized the Spider-Man had prepared them ahead of time. The Spider-Man had complained about how smart the monster was, but he couldn't believe it had the nerve to fight him. Yunos then used the bandit's corpse wrapped in thread to distract the Spider-Man. He tried to grab its head and crush it to end the fight. While he managed to grab the Spider-Man, it quickly escaped his grasp. To Yunos' surprise, the Spider-Man shed its skin to break free. Even worse, the mucus left behind from the skin acted like acid. Yunos fell to his knees in pain as Spider-Man laughed and spat poison at him. The poison drenched Yunos, and the Spider-Man laughed even harder before leaving, assuming Yunos would die. At that moment, Yunos realized how deadly the poison was. His body was already going numb, and he knew it could kill him if he didn't act fast. Then he remembered the potion he had taken from Diara. He didn't know if it would work, but he figured it was worth trying. Despite his weakness, Yunos managed to walk out of the cave and grab the potion from the backpack he had left outside. He poured the potion onto his injured arm, hoping for the best. Slowly, the numbness and pain began to fade. Before long, he was fully healed, though his body was still in bad shape, with his bones visible under his skin. Yunos realized how useful potions were and felt thankful to Diara, although he had stolen them from her. Yunos panicked, not because it was life-threatening, but because it was the first time he had felt real pain since waking up. It was a serious situation, and he couldn't imagine the spider-like creature using the same ability on humans. He realized there could be more victims, like the ones he had seen earlier. Yunos had no desire to play the hero, but he couldn't ignore innocent women being harmed. He was also a man of culture, and he wasn't going to let a monster rob him of that. He didn't need a reason to stop the monster. Yunos soon felt that his body had recovered. The pain and numbness had disappeared. His sharp sense of smell reminded him of the creature's scent, and from it, he knew who the spider's next target was. At the same time, the Spider-Man perched on a tree branch watching a carriage moving below. Driving it was the beautiful woman Yunos had saved earlier. She had caught the Spider-Man's attention. It decided she would be its next victim, but first it wondered how to make her suffer before taking what it wanted. Suddenly his plans were interrupted when something hit a nearby tree. He turned around and saw Yunos holding a handful of stones. He couldn't believe the monster was still alive. As Yunos started throwing stones at him, he had to dodge quickly. He found Yunos frustrating because his target might escape at this rate. It also annoyed him that Yunos kept a safe distance, aware of the danger posed by his threads. He couldn't believe a simple monster was getting smarter. Meanwhile, Yunos picked up more stones and realized his aim had improved, thanks to his encounters with the goblins. For now, he had to stop the Spider-Man from chasing the carriage. The women needed time to get away safely. This was no longer just a fight. It was a test of endurance between him and the Spider-Man. The Spider-Man grew annoyed and decided to attack directly. Noticing this, Yunos quickly jumped backward to create some distance. The Spider-Man became even more frustrated and shouted at Yunos not to run away. In response, Yunos started firing more stones, but the Spider-Man managed to dodge all of them. Yunos kept moving further away, making sure to stay out of reach as the Spider-Man tried to close in for a melee attack. Frustrated by Yunos' strategy, the Spider-Man finally lost his patience and suddenly vanished from sight. He reappeared above Yunos, attempting to shower him with poison again. Yunos anticipated this move and realized the Spider-Man would likely retreat the moment he dodged the poison. Timing his move carefully, Yunos dodged and grabbed a nearby tree. Using the momentum, he swung around the tree and shifted to another spot, maintaining a safe distance. The Spider-Man's movements were exactly what Yunos had expected. Yunos planned to keep closing in if the Spider-Man retreated and to pull back if the Spider-Man advanced. He also intended to use the nearby trees to tangle the Spider-Man's threads. If an opportunity came, he would uproot a tree and launch it at the Spider-Man. It was a straightforward plan, simple to execute and repeat as needed. The frustrated Spider-Man told Yunos to fight fairly. but Yunos had no intention of listening, especially not to someone he considered a criminal. This wasn't even a battle, it was a hunt. The chase went on for days, with Yunos constantly harassing Spider-Man and staying close behind him. After several days, Spider-Man felt completely drained. He couldn't tell how much time had passed. It felt like a month since he first confronted Yunos. He couldn't understand why he was stuck dealing with such a creature, or how Yunos had managed to corner him like this. Exhaustion made his head spin. He was out of energy because Yunos had stopped him from eating or sleeping. On top of that, he couldn't even produce his threads anymore. Suddenly, one of his legs was crushed by a flying rock and he took serious damage. Strangely, he could feel the pain now, and that confused him. He wondered why someone like him had to suffer so much, being treated like an experiment. Frustrated, he began shouting angrily and charged at Yunos. Before he could get far, more rocks flew toward him, crushing his other legs. It was as if Yunos were a skilled pitcher throwing from a mound. The Spider-Man collapsed helplessly on the ground, unable to stand. He tried to crawl away, crying in pain like a starving child. Yunos walked over, grabbed him by the neck, and tore his humanoid upper body away from his spider-like lower half. The Spider-Man screamed and writhed in agony. Yunos carried him like a broken toy and approached a tree. Without saying a word, he slammed the Spider-Man's face against the trunk and started scratching something into the bark. The Spider-Man, still in pain, noticed the markings. His eyes widened as he realized Yunos was writing in the language of Ferletos. It hit him like a shock. Yunos was just like him, another experimental soldier. He looked at Yunos with new understanding, but Yunos growled in response as if to say, "Die!" The Spider-Man panicked and began begging for mercy, saying they were the same and should be comrades. But before he could say more, Yunos crushed his head, silencing him forever. Yunos stood there, thinking to himself that he could never be grouped together with someone like that. Many days later, our friendly monster protagonist stood on a cliff, looking out like Mufasa. It might surprise you, but Yunos was already in the elven country of the Einhell Republic. He apologized to the viewers for making them wait so long for the elf arc. You might be wondering what happened to Yunos' mission in Canaan. Well, he took care of that too. After defeating the spider monster, he traveled to the frontline city between Canaan and Einhell. But when he arrived, he saw that Canaan had stopped using advanced technology. Instead of modern weapons, they were only using simple ballistas. In Einhell, the people worshipped nature and focused on minimal development. Because of this, the number of monsters kept growing. While this wasn't a big problem for the elves, who were strong, it was a huge issue for humans. The frontline cities should have had advanced weapons to fight off the monsters. But instead, they were still using ballistas, the same weapons from 200 years ago. Yunos was very disappointed in Canaan because he had expected much more from them. He decided to go to his usual recon spot. It had been 2 weeks since he arrived in the Elven country, and he had learned a lot about them. The women here were all incredibly beautiful, but there were also men. Yunos had heard that elves were experts in magic, and unlike humans, they could use magic without needing to say words or incantations. On top of that, they could use magic endlessly and with great power, which Yunos thought was like cheating. The elves used magic for everyday tasks like lighting fires, picking up things, and even doing laundry. This constant use of magic helped them become so skilled at it. However, the real danger of elves wasn't their magic. Yunos soon reached his recon spot and wondered if it was time yet. Then the greatest threat appeared. The truth was, elves were incredibly cute and beautiful. He had known about their beautiful looks, but seeing them in person made him feel like they were on another level. This was coming from someone who had seen over 100 elven women in person. Yunos was patrolling the area for research purposes on this dangerous species. After observing enough, Yunos decided to move on to his next recon spot. In the next spot, Yunos activated his enhanced eyesight. He saw Miss Elf number 6, who had come to take a bath with some elven children. Miss Elf number 6 was someone Yunos found very interesting, and she seemed to be the real threat. She was a teacher who always brought the children with her wherever she went. Of course, number 6 was a nickname Yunos had given her. It was exciting to see everything bare up close, but the sight of her clothes clinging to her skin was also something else. With his zoom function, Yunos could see everything clearly, which made it even more intense. Then, the children started getting rowdy, and Yunos knew it was the right time. The kids began playing with Miss Elf number 6's clothes. She was the gentle type, so she would always fall for their tricks, which was why the boys acted this way. Yunos found it outrageous, but secretly hoped the boys would do more. In the end, the boys were scolded. As Miss Elf number 6 left with the kids, Yunos praised her as he usually did and congratulated the boys for their hard work. But then, Yunos suddenly felt a heavy presence. There were 2 huge forces nearby. Yunos was shocked to see number 8 appear earlier than expected. He hadn't had a chance to rest and began sweating nervously. Number 8 was another elf Yunos had become interested in, as her presence was overwhelming. It was so big, in fact, that she always had 2 attendants with her, which showed she held a high position in the country. If she were the queen, it would be serious trouble. However, it seemed there was a reason she kept her eyes closed. She also had a more ritualistic way of bathing compared to the other elves. It was clear she wasn't ordinary, and the mystery around her made her stand out. Because of this, Yunos couldn't afford to miss a single moment and had to watch her carefully. She was truly one of the most terrifying beings. Despite the excitement in his mind, Yunos felt nothing in the basement. He remembered that he couldn't do anything, even though a delicious feast was right in front of him. Then he thought back to how Spider-Man had cried out in frustration over his missing mushroom. Spider-Man's words reminded Yunos that his own mushroom was gone too. He also remembered how skilled Spider-Man was with his abilities. Yunos wondered if the emptiness Spider-Man felt had built up and driven him crazy. Yunos couldn't help but feel sorry for someone like him. He even thought that he might end up the same way someday. After saying goodbye to number 8, Yunos suddenly felt calm. He was grateful for the emotion suppression function, which helped him avoid sinking deeper into these depressing thoughts. Since it was getting late in the afternoon, Yunos decided to use the time to gather supplies and do chores, knowing that the elves didn't visit the river after sunset. Yunos drained the blood from a deer he had hunted, cut some of the meat, and cooked it. As expected, the taste was bland without salt. After eating a full meal, he lay down for the night. He rolled to his side and tried to sleep but felt restless. He sat up thinking about how the Spider-Man existed. He realized he might find more test subjects like himself in the Empire's capital. But Yunos had other reasons to go there too. He always knew he was meant to return to the Imperial capital, but he couldn't make up his mind. He knew the Empire had turned into a huge forest, filled with ruins and monsters, and that time had stopped on May 2nd. He understood what had happened to the Empire, but he didn't want to admit it. He still hoped the Empire might still exist somewhere else, even if that hope was tiny. He also wondered if he would end up broken like the Spider-Man. Right now, he found some distraction watching the elves from the shadows. But deep down, he knew he was just avoiding reality. It was harder than he thought. After some time, Yunos decided to go to the Imperial capital. The next morning, he packed his things into his backpack. He then went to his usual cliff to say goodbye to the elves. At that moment, number 6 was taking a bath. Yunos froze for a moment, then realized that leaving was a really tough choice. For God's sake, please hurry up and go. De'Ara remembered a flashback from her childhood. An old man had told her she needed to take off her clothes if she wanted to become a great wizard. Even though she didn't want to, De'Ara felt she had no choice but to go through with it. She wanted to go home and see her parents. But when she finally returned to her village, everything was burned down and everyone was gone. De'Ara suddenly woke up gasping for air and covered in sweat. It had all been a nightmare, and it felt like the worst one she'd ever had. Later, as she walked through the streets of Rekal in the kingdom of Canaan, De'Ara remembered something a woman had said to her. The woman was the leader of a group of 5 women whom Yunos had saved before. She had told De'Ara she had already shared information with the guards, but any extra details would cost a fee. De'Ara hesitated, but eventually gave her a silver coin. The woman called her generous and asked what she wanted to know. De'Ara asked for all the information the woman had, even the smallest details. The woman explained that she couldn't offer much for just a silver coin, but if De'Ara was okay with that, she had some information to share. The woman explained that she and others had been kidnapped and were on their way to the bandits' hideout. While that was bad enough, things got worse when a strange gray monster appeared and caused chaos. She described how the bandits ran away in fear when they saw the creature. The woman understood why after seeing the monster herself. De'Ara asked why the monster attacked the carriage, but the woman didn't know. She said the monster just seemed to search around the carriage, like it was looking for something, but it didn't hurt anyone. After staring at them for a while, the monster ran off. However, it came back shortly after to look at them again before leaving without causing harm. The woman believed the monster was focused on their physical appearance, especially on their breasts, thinking it was a common view that such creatures are attracted to women. In the end, they were released, but they remained cautious on their way home. Then the woman commented on how beautiful De'Ara was and praised her figure. She even offered De'Ara a job at a brothel with high pay. De'Ara wasn't sure if that was meant to be a compliment, but hoped she could ask the woman for help in the future. As De'Ara walked out of the brothel, she realized that the monster was getting close to Canaan's borders. She passed by some young adventurers talking about how to spend their hard-earned money. De'Ara stopped for a moment, feeling like she could relate to them a little. She also remembered how she became an apprentice at just 8 years old. Her mentor preferred young girls, and though she had magic talent, that seemed to be the only reason he took her. He wanted her for himself. Even though others showed mercy, her innocence was taken away. Still, she kept training hard until she became a full-grown adult. But when she returned to her hometown, she found it destroyed by monsters. The sight of it shattered her. She became an adventurer, hunting down monsters relentlessly, with near-death experiences happening almost every day. There were times when she was betrayed and hurt by fellow adventurers, but none of it mattered anymore. The only thing that kept her going was her determination to wipe out every monster in the world. During those tough times, Diera met the siblings, Rena and Lizelle. They invited her to join their party, and it was the first time Diera had ever done that. Later, Gista, who often teamed up with the siblings, officially joined the party. Diera felt like she could leave any time, but after going through hardships, joys, and many dangerous situations together, she started to feel different. During one mission, even though Lizelle looked nearly dead, he defeated an ogre and got a magic sword as a reward. Gista was amazed they had survived, while Lena, who was healing him, told Gista to be quiet. Lizelle asked what to do with the sword. Diera suggested that Lizelle, as their leader, should take it and become a man worthy of it. This temporary team had truly become a real home for Diera. But as always, monsters took away the people she cared about. The sword, Yunos, was proof that her team and herself had a place to belong. Diera swore to get it back no matter what, and promised to return to Lena's side. She hoped Lena would patiently wait for her. Yunos walked through some ruins, and it was clear that this place had been affected by the war. He had left Einhell and was heading southeast toward the imperial capital as quickly as he could. By the time the sun had set, he had reached the ruins. Based on its location, he guessed it was the town of Idres, but it was hard to tell because it looked so run down. Yunos thought it might be the work of the elves using their magic. He had been watching them secretly for half a month, so he felt like they owed him something in return. Even though he gave a thumbs up like an imperial politician, he didn't hear any reactions, so he just kept going. Night fell, but Yunos didn't feel tired and kept running. As he ran without a clear direction, he saw a tall structure ahead and recognized it. As he got closer, he realized it was the Shubaru Iron Tower. It was leaning but still standing after hundreds of years. The Empire's technology was truly impressive. Yunos remembered visiting the tower with his family in the past. He stopped for a moment, lost in the memories of those family times he still cherished. A group of goblins appeared suddenly, noticing Yunos because he was trespassing. Yunos had already smelled them coming, their stinky scent filling the air. However, there were more goblins than he had expected, and he wondered if a goblin queen was with them. He smirked, thinking it was the perfect time to release some frustration. He glared at the goblins, and that made the poor creatures shake with fear. As the sun rose, the ground was covered with pieces of goblins and their blood. Nothing moved among them. They had all turned into piles of slaughtered bodies. In the center of a coliseum, the goblin queen lay dead, surrounded by the lifeless bodies of her children. Meanwhile, Yunos was already heading somewhere else. It had taken him longer than expected to deal with all the goblins, but he was getting closer to the town of Aiga. He used his enhanced vision and saw that the town was in worse shape than he had thought. From a distance, a strange feeling about the town grew inside him. Every town he had visited so far was covered in green, but Aiga was covered in gray ash. This made Yunos suspect something unusual had happened. His gut feeling had been right so far. The people there looked completely burned. He wondered if the elves had done this, but even if they were at war, they wouldn't burn everything so thoroughly. Yunos had suspected this from the very beginning. He remembered reading an article on May 2nd, the last day of the Empire, that talked about the ultimate weapon. Even though he didn't want to believe it, Yunos knew it was possible for the Empire to have done something like that, especially after seeing how Aiga had turned into a barren wasteland. He guessed the ultimate weapon had been used after all. He realized he needed a break since he hadn't rested since leaving Einhell and taking care of the goblins. But he also knew he had to get to the capital quickly to confirm something. Suddenly, Yunos stopped running and stared at what was in front of him. He had already known about it, but didn't want to accept it because of his ties to the Empire. The answer had been right in front of him the whole time. In front of him was a massive crater, clearly the result of a huge explosion. Yunos jumped into the crater and felt the sand for the first time. He had never been to the beach before, but he wondered if the sand here felt the same. Yunos looked around the center of the crater, trying to understand how much explosives it would have taken to make something this big. He now understood why Canaan had given up on science. The crater beneath him was a sign of what technology could do. As a citizen of the Empire who had survived all of this, Yunos couldn't help but want to know what had happened to his homeland. He questioned if the Empire's path had been a mistake. Frustration built up inside him, and he let out a loud, terrifying roar. In just 2 days, Yunos was back in Einhell, watching the elves closely. He observed them like a critic, but still greeted you, our dear viewers. As he expected, his homeland, the Empire, had been completely destroyed. Worse, it had happened by their own hands. At that point, the only thing Yunos could do was investigate the greatest threat on the continent, the elves and their true nature. As always, being a man of culture, Yunos spent his time studying the elves' daily lives. Deep down, though, Yunos knew he was avoiding reality. He wondered if someone from the Empire might still be alive, working on technology that could help him become human again. But his hope shattered when he saw the destruction caused by the ultimate weapon. While Yunos didn't hate his current form, he still wished he could return to being human. He worried about living as a monster, unable to communicate with others. Despite the heavy stress, watching the elves bathe, especially number 8, helped him relax and gave him some energy. Thanks to the elves, Yunos managed to keep his sanity. He started thinking that if he couldn't become human again, it might be better to accept his life as a monster. After all, he had seen what happened to those who couldn't accept their fate. Gradually, Yunos realized he didn't mind staying in his current lifestyle after all. Even though he had become a monster, Yunos hadn't completely lost hope. He still found small ways to enjoy being human, even in his current state. What mattered most to him now was focusing on living life as best as he could. However, there was one thing that constantly disappointed him: food. Every time he ate meat, he craved salt because everything tasted bland. The salt he found in the Empire was terrible, and his only option was to steal it from others. Reluctantly, he decided to break his own rule against stealing. With that, he quickly made up his mind to get salt from Canaan. Once that was settled, Yunos, now a monster, began his journey to Canaan. Meanwhile, in Canaan, Orlando looked troubled. One of his subordinates glared at him and scolded him for not even knowing basic reading and writing. Orlando argued that being able to write his name was good enough. His subordinate pointed out how everyone else was studying and working hard, while their captain was doing nothing to improve. Since there wasn't much time, the subordinate offered to read the report for Orlando. Orlando thanked him, trying to act playful, but his subordinate, Edward, felt annoyed and wanted to hit him for it. Orlando learned about a goblin colony that had been recently wiped out. Edward couldn't believe the reports at first, but after encountering a new type of monster, they both knew it had to be the creature's doing. At that time, the monster, Yunos, was classified as a disaster-class threat because no major destruction had been caused yet. However, Orlando believed Yunos deserved a higher threat level. Just by looking at the creature, it was clear he could cause more harm than anyone imagined. Orlando predicted that the bounty for Yunos would increase if the situation escalated, and he vowed their team would be the one to claim it. Edward was surprised by how excited Orlando seemed, and teased that money might as well be written across his face. He also reminded Orlando to keep his aggressive tendencies under control. Orlando reluctantly agreed but pointed out that they still needed the money. Edward then mentioned how their funds had been drained after buying a large supply of weapons to fight the monster. Hearing this, Orlando suggested recruiting new team members to train. As for the weapons, he was satisfied with their quality but noted they needed more mages since their team was short on magical support. Edward explained that finding skilled mages was difficult. Even the kingdom of Caesarea struggled to find good ones. Orlando agreed but joked that he hoped a talented and desperate mage would show up at their door. He also made a playful remark about wanting the mage to be big-boobed. Edward smirked and threatened to report those words to Annie, which made Orlando panic. He quickly asked why Annie's name was even brought up. Edward teased him further, mentioning a 200-year-old bottle of wine at the tavern that might help him forget. Feeling trapped, Orlando reluctantly offered to treat Edward to the expensive wine. At that moment, Annie walked in and overheard the conversation. She excitedly asked if Orlando was treating everyone. Soon the rest of the team joined in, placing their orders after hearing Annie's words. Orlando panicked, trying to stop them, warning them that they needed to stick to their budget. Edward couldn't help but laugh, thinking that Orlando had gotten exactly what he deserved for slacking off. Yunos stood casually, watching a group of trembling men. In front of them were the bodies of adventurers lying in pools of blood. Although he couldn't understand their words, it was clear the men, likely bandits, were terrified of him. He had just arrived in Canaan and was surprised to stumble upon a merchant caravan being attacked by bandits. Judging by the scene, the noisy ones were probably the bandits, while the dead were the coachmen and the guards. His eyes rested on a fallen female adventurer. He felt sorry for what had happened to her. On closer inspection, he noticed she had a petite figure and some materials nearby that seemed to be padding. He realized she must have faced many challenges and silently prayed for her soul. Suddenly, he noticed he was being attacked. However, the bandits' weapons couldn't pierce his tough skin. He was surprised by how unskilled they were, attacking him directly instead of trying to ambush him. He wondered if their leader was as foolish as a goblin. Now certain they were bandits, Yunos decided not to hold back. He swung his arm with incredible speed, crushing one bandit's head with a single blow. The horrifying sight caused the remaining bandits to panic and run, but it was too late. Yunos couldn't stop himself from unleashing his full strength. He impaled one bandit with his arm, then chased the others. With a powerful kick, he struck another bandit, his attack tearing through the man's body. The last survivor collapsed to the ground in terror, crying and wetting himself as Yunos approached menacingly. Yunos recalled advice from his teacher about taking the initiative to strike fear into others. Agreeing with the thought, he finished off the last bandit with a swift kick, crushing his head. Oddly, the teacher he remembered wasn't real but an actress from a rented DVD. As the situation settled, Yunos looked around and realized he had gone too far again. Even though the people he fought were bandits, they were still human, but Yunos didn't seem to care much. After all, bandits were people who harmed others, and from Canaan's point of view, they should have been thankful to Yunos for saving them the trouble of putting the bandits on trial. For now, Yunos expected to be rewarded for dealing with the bandits. He focused on the merchant's caravan, hoping to find treasure inside, especially salt. When he checked the contents, he found something unexpected. More people. They screamed in fear when they saw him. Later, by a nearby river, Yunos was smiling brightly. He had finally found what he was looking for: salt. There were 2 jars of it. All this time he had been eating only dried meat, but now with salt he could improve his meals. Despite the number of wagons, the loot was disappointing. Aside from the salt, he found some wool, which he used to cushion the fragile jars, and a fancy water jug. The jug looked valuable because of its detailed design, so Yunos hoped it was magical. However, no matter what he tried, nothing happened. He thought about using it as a regular water jug, but it had a hole at the bottom. Yunos guessed it might have been part of a fountain. Unfortunately, it was completely useless to him, so he decided to toss it away. For now, he lay down and started thinking about his next plans. He decided he would go back to the shopping mall to get better jars for the salt because, even with the wool padding, they might still break. Recently, he had been traveling back and forth between the Empire, Canaan, and Einhell. Since he kept following the same path, he thought it would be smarter to set up a base of operations in the Empire. After a moment of reflection, he realized it was a brilliant idea. If he stocked up on essentials, he could use it as a central base, and it would definitely be worth the effort. More than anything, though, his inner child loved the idea of building something like a secret base. He was someone who enjoyed a bit of adventure, after all. For now, he decided to create the base somewhere near Einhell and Canaan. The town of Idris, or a nearby area, seemed like a perfect choice. Yunos felt a surge of excitement and couldn't wait for morning to arrive. The next morning, Yunos began his journey back to his homeland, carefully carrying the jars of salt. As he got closer to Idris, he noticed something unusual in the surroundings, colors that didn't belong there. Curious, he wondered if it could be some kind of artifact. The trees blocked his view, making it hard to use his enhanced eyesight properly. So he decided to crawl closer to investigate. He crept forward and used his enhanced sight again. Suddenly, he froze in place. A chill ran down his spine as he realized what he was looking at. Sweat formed on his brow as he understood there was no way to avoid what lay ahead. That is the end of the recap at Chapter 9.2. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.